Okay, this is part 2 of the third lesson on sound on the human ear. So you're obviously hearing this right now. You're lucky enough to be able to hear it. And the first question we're going to ask here is how? How does your ear process the sound it receives? We talked about in energy how energy often goes through transformations from one form into another, and it's never lost or created. But I'll just give you a quick review of that. Right now, I'm talking to you. What happens is, as I force air through my vocal cords go back and forth hundreds of times per second, changing its pitch even, so how often the vocal cords are going back and forth determines how often the air is being vibrated, which changes the frequency of the noise, which sounds higher or lower, or if I'm pushing more air through, it allows me to compress more of it, which is louder or softer, even though I think the microphone on the the receiver on the earbuds I have kind of correct for that anyway. So you may or may not be hearing it louder or softer. In any case, the sound gets transferred into an electrical signal in the microphone. It gets put into the computer. It gets sound out as light in the form of radio waves over online. And then it travels to your computer, and the speakers in your computer are changing that electrical energy, the light energy that gets changed into electrical energy, into motion energy of the speakers, which creates vibrations in the air. And then, at that point, finally, your ears are kicking in and receiving those signals and processing them. So, if you thought it was complicated to get to your ear is probably the most complicated part of that whole process. The structure of the human ear can receive sound waves as vibrations and convert them to signals that are processed by the brain. So your ear is basically, if I could summarize it, it is a air vibration electrical signal outputter. It takes in air vibrations and it very delicately turns them into electrical impulses that go through your nerves into your brain. And your brain really makes you imagine that you're hearing what you're hearing. The fact that humans have figured this out at this point is also kind of cool because we've started to create implants in the brain that can kind of bypass the ear's process. But, we're not even that great at that yet. Just to give you an idea of all the things we can do, right? We can send people to the moon, but we've just barely begun to replicate the same technology that we have in our ears for sound. Kind of amazing. The structure of it, we're going to start talking from the outside and then we'll go in from there. So it's usually broken up into 3 different areas: the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. The outer being the place that mostly collects the sound, the middle ear starting to turn that signal into something that we can understand, it's amplifying it, and then the inner ear as being the processing plant where it's actually like receiving and making it something that the brain can understand. So in our notes right now, we're in the outer ear in that first part there. Make sure that you're going along in the guided notes that I provided or keeping your own. So the 2 main structures of the outer ear, and we're going to be talking about structures and function because this is our technology, are the pinna and the ear canal. So the pinna is the whole ear lobe, if you want to think about it like that, like your entire ear. The shape of it, what do you take a stop right now and think, like, what the heck do you think that's for? Why is it shaped the way it is? Okay, so if you guessed, based on your understanding of sound interactions, that it is there to help reflect the sound into your ear, you're absolutely correct, right? If you were to take a second and cup your hands over your ears, you would notice that it allows you to take in more sound from one direction. You're able to take it from that specific direction maybe, or if you were to cup it backwards, you could hear from behind you better. But the really cool part about your ears is that you can kind of hear from everywhere. And not only that, you're used to hearing this or that, so it almost allows you to specifically know when sound's coming from behind you, or when it's coming from in front of you, or right from the side of you. And you can do all that at the same time. It's pretty amazing. So if you didn't have a pinna for an ear, it would be much harder to sense the direction that sound's coming from and also to capture as much sound. Now that sends it down the ear canal. Basically, it's not collecting it like it goes out and sucks it, but it allows the sound that's out there to get reflected into your ear. So we've just completed these first couple of notes here, right? It goes into the ear canal where the sound waves are amplified, meaning that it's able to take it and start to transform it into more compressions of air. It's kind of like if you were to take a river and channel it into a smaller area, right? It would become more intense. It's almost like an amplification of the energy of the river. It's not that there's more water, it's just that it's being forced into a smaller area. So that's kind of what the ear canal does, is it amplifies it in that way. So I just kind of give that away, but the outer ear collects and amplifies those sound waves. As it goes in there, you can see it's kind of getting more and more narrow, but the same amount of energy is present, right? It just means that it's going to get more focused, which is what that amplification sounds like. Okay, moving on to the middle ear now. So the middle ear is slightly more weird and alien looking, but not quite there yet. It will get weirder, trust me. It has these major 3 bones and the eardrum, starting with the eardrum. The eardrum is exactly what it sounds like. It is a drum head. It is a membrane. It's very sensitive, it's easy to tear, that is able to be pushed back and forth. You imagine like the head on a drum, the thing that you hit with a mallet on a drum. It's like a thinly stretched out piece of usually animal skin that is able to transfer the vibrations from one side and move the air on the other, which is kind of what's happening here. But instead of moving air like a drum does, this actually moves bones. That's right, people. You have bones in your ear. Not just 1, but 3. They're called the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. As you can see in this picture here, that's not the actual scientific name for them. The stapes is also not, it is a scientific name, it's often used for it, but we'll get into that in a second. So basically you can see they're getting smaller and smaller. They're levers, which is also pretty sweet, as you know about leverage. And also with pressure, you can think this whole area here is much bigger than this tiny little area down here. So if you're pushing up against the membrane, the eardrum, and transferring all that force into the stapes, or the stirrup, the pressure increases greatly, which is going to be pretty important for transferring the signal from sound from outside of your ear to the cochlea inside of it. Alright, so the main purpose of the middle ear is to once again amplify the sound waves. One, by taking it from sound in a larger area to what's actually going to be inside of this, which is liquid, which is in a smaller area. So it's able to take it and compress it once again. I'm sorry, just so you know, I did skip over that, but the scientific names for those are the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. You don't need to know that. The sound waves make the eardrum vibrate, and the eardrum makes those 3 tiny little bones to vibrate: the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, like I said. I would definitely recommend you take a look at this video if you're not too squeamish. This is what a healthy eardrum looks like on the left here. This is one that has a perforation in it. There's a bunch of different ways you can have that happening. Stuff can get stuck in there, sometimes even just like decay from infections and stuff like that, which are terrible. It happens, right? But the beauty of this is when it's working properly, you can actually see the hammer right there sitting up against the eardrum. Now, I think like a person like Beethoven, who went deaf, these bones kept growing and actually pierced through his internal ear, which is unbelievable that he was still able to produce some of the music he produced after he had become deaf. But they basically, all that to say, these things are very tiny and they work extraordinarily well. underappreciated. That's what they say. Ossicles. So this is just another diagram of this. Once again, this would be sitting up against your eardrum right here, and this sits up against the cochlea. Malleus, the incus, and the stapes. We talked about this already. And for reference, that's a dime compared to these little tiny bones in your ear. Okay, now we're going to be going into the inner ear. I feel like we're on the Magic School Bus, except there's no moving images, which would be much more cool. I'm sorry. Okay, the inner ear converts sound waves to nerve impulses. So nerve is the little message carriers in your body. If you're at the Franklin Institute seeing the brain exhibit, you kind of have an idea of what those things look like even. But they need signals to go into them. This is where the inner ear comes in. So the tiny bones in the middle ear, that would be the the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup, make the fluid in the cochlea vibrate. This causes tiny little hair cells in the cochlea to vibrate, and the vibrations are passed to the auditory nerve at the end of the cochlea, which leads to the brain. Pretty cool stuff. This is what a cochlea looks like when you slice it in half. Like I said, pretty alien looking, but this is inside of your ear. It's amazing how well this thing works. On the outside here, you have hairs that are attached to little tiny nerves that connect to the auditory nerve that goes into your brain. And basically, this is where the stapes will be resting up against your cochlea. So as it beats into the cochlea, these little single little hairs here start to resonate. Just like we said back in the day, resonance is when a certain frequency is met by another thing that naturally resonates at a frequency. So in other words, if you have a particular pitch, there's going to be a single set of hairs in here that start to vibrate when that pitch is reached. This also means that if you have multiple pitches, you can hear multiple vibrations at the same exact time, which is absolutely wild to me. On the outside, this is what these little hairs look like using an electron tunneling microscope. So the further out you are the higher frequency noises or higher frequency sounds in your cochlea. Here's where the stapes would be. So out here, this is where you're hearing your high-pitched noises right now. And in here it gets lower and lower and lower and lower. Basically, down here, all the way in your inner ear, might be somewhere around here even, right? It's not even close to in here yet. But there is a limit to how low you can hear in terms of your pitch. Now, elephants hear lower frequencies than that. They must just have bigger cochleas, right? All different animals have different looking cochleas, but ours are pretty fantastic if you ask me. Now you might ask, like, why is it that as you get older you lose your ability to hear higher pitches first, right? Like even now, I think I probably only hear up to 17,000 hertz as a 30-some-year-old person. And when I'm 70, I'll probably hear only up to here, right? And if you're looking at this diagram, it should make more sense. Basically, if all the sound travels through this stuff, then this gets all the beating, right? It's like the doormat for your ear. The inner ear won't have as much. This is also higher energy, higher frequency sound is higher energy, so just is more damaging over time. But the best thing you can do to protect your ears is not blast music into them. Come on now, you knuckleheads. So your cochlea is smaller than the baby fingernail, depending on how big your fingernail is. And then the auditory nerve, this spiny looking thing coming out there, picks up all those signals and turns them into electricity that goes into your brain to make the music happen. So this is a pretty amazing process, and I'm going to skip forward just a little bit here. Your brain is able to interpret this using that nerve, but there could be all sorts of problems that happen along the way. We just described a very complicated system. So we are done with these different parts here. We're done with all this. If you want to watch more, there's a video here that explains it very, very well. And also, I want you to go through and practice doing this diagram. And you can check on the slides to make sure you understand it. Pause it here. And if you want to find out more check out the rest of this.